A wedding reception is meant to honor family. But beneath the crystal chandeliers, Matthew Reed stood tall and told his new wife's mother to leave. Not later, not privately, now. Lorraine Wallace didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She simply turned as dozens of guests watched in careful silence. Kendra Wallace said nothing. Matthew believed he had just protected his image. He didn't know he had just activated something far more permanent, something already waiting beyond that room. If you believe dignity should never be negotiated, stay with this story until the end. Tell me where you're watching from and your local time. I read every comment. And if stories like this matter to you, consider subscribing. Months before the wedding, Kendra Wallace had already learned how to measure silence. Not as absence, but as information. It showed itself in the way Matthew Reed paused before answering certain questions, in how he adjusted his tone, depending on who was in the room, and in the subtle tightening of his jaw whenever her mother's name surfaced in conversation. None of it was loud enough to confront. None of it was obvious enough to accuse. But it existed consistently, like a quiet thread running beneath everything they were building together. Kendra did not pull at it. She simply noticed. She worked long hours at a mid-sized consulting firm in downtown Chicago, known among her colleagues for her steady presence and her ability to see patterns others overlooked. She did not dominate meetings. She did not interrupt. But when she spoke, people listened because her words rarely needed correction. It was the same discipline she carried into her personal life. Observe first, understand, then decide. Matthew admired that about her, at least in the beginning. He told people she was grounded, different. Not like the women he had dated before, who he described with an easy smile as too interested in appearances. Kendra never asked him to explain what that meant. She didn't need to. She understood that for Matthew, everything was a reflection of something else. Status control, expectation. Even admiration came with structure. Matthew Reed had built his career carefully, not recklessly fast, but deliberately. He worked in private equity, the kind of environment where perception could shift outcomes just as much as numbers. He knew which dinners mattered, which conversations needed to be remembered, and which names opened doors. He wore his success cleanly tailored suits, precise language, and a calm that suggested nothing ever truly caught him off guard. Except sometimes things did. Like Lorraine Wallace. Kendra's mother did not fit into Matthew's world in any visible way. She lived in a modest two-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood that had long since been bypassed by the city's newer developments. Her clothes were simple, chosen for comfort rather than impression. She did not speak about money even when others did. And when she listened, she gave her full attention, which often made people uneasy without them knowing why. Matthew had met her for the first time over dinner. He had arrived with a bottle of wine that carried more meaning in its label than in its taste. Lorraine had thanked him, placed it carefully on the counter, and continued preparing the meal she had already started before he arrived. There had been no performance, no visible effort to impress him, and no acknowledgement of the significance he assumed the gesture carried. He noticed. Throughout the evening, Lorraine asked him questions that were polite but precise. Not about his income or his position, but about his decisions. Why he chose his field. What he believed made a business sustainable. How he defined risk. Matthew answered well. He always did. But something about the conversation unsettled him in a way he did not articulate. It wasn't confrontation. Lorraine never challenged him directly. She simply listened long enough that his answers had nowhere to hide. Kendra saw it. She saw the moment Matthew shifted slightly in his chair. The way he adjusted his watch, then his cuff, then reached for his glass even when he didn't need it. Small movements barely noticeable unless you were looking for them. Kendra was always looking. After dinner, as they drove back to Matthew's apartment, he kept his voice neutral. "She's very straightforward," he said. Kendra looked out the window, watching the city lights move in reflection against the glass. She doesn't waste words. Matthew nodded, but the agreement felt incomplete. She doesn't seem very concerned with how things come across, he added. Kendra turned her head slightly, just enough to see him without fully shifting her posture. Concerned to who, Matthew did not answer immediately. He rarely rushed responses when he didn't have a clean one ready. To people who matter, he said finally. Kendra let the silence return. She didn't argue. She didn't defend. She stored the sentence exactly as it was. People who matter. It was not the first time Matthew had drawn that kind of line. But it was the first time he had placed her mother on the other side of it so clearly. Weeks passed, and the pattern did not change. It refined itself. Matthew remained attentive, supportive, and outwardly generous. He planned weekends, introduced Kendra to colleagues, and included her in conversations about future investments and long-term plans. To anyone observing them, they were aligned, stable, and moving forward without hesitation. But beneath that alignment, Matthew began making quiet adjustments. He suggested different outfits when they attended events together. Nothing overtly critical, always framed as helpful. That color photographs better, he would say, or this venue leans more formal. Kendra listened. Sometimes she agreed. Sometimes she chose differently. Matthew never forced the change, but he always noticed when she resisted. He asked fewer questions about Lorraine. When Kendra mentioned visiting her mother, Matthew responded with polite interest, but he rarely followed up. The topic closed quickly, as if it had already reached its acceptable limit. And when Lorraine invited them both to dinner again, Matthew accepted, but not without checking his calendar twice. The second dinner was quieter. Lorraine prepared a simple meal, the kind that required time, but not attention. It allowed for conversation without interruption. Matthew arrived on time, etc., dressed as he always was, intentional, precise. He greeted Lorraine respectfully, but his tone carried a slight distance, one that had not been there before. Kendra noticed that too. Midway through the meal, Lorraine excused herself briefly and returned with a small folder. She placed it on the edge of the table, not in the center, not presented, just set down as if it belonged there already. Matthew glanced at it, then back at her. "What's that?" he asked. "Something I've been organizing," Lorraine said. "Old records." Matthew nodded, but his interest did not extend beyond the surface. "For taxes?" "Partly," Lorraine replied. She did not open the folder. She did not explain further. And after a moment, the conversation moved on. But Kendra's eyes lingered on it. The folder was worn, its edges softened from time rather than neglect. It was not new. Whatever it contained had been kept, not created recently. Kendra didn't ask about it at the table. She waited. Later that night, as she helped her mother clear the dishes, she spoke quietly. "You've been going through things." Lorraine dried her hands and folded the towel neatly before answering. "Just making sure everything is in order," she said. For what? Lorraine met her daughter's eyes, calm, steady. For when it needs to be. Kendra didn't press further. She had learned long ago that her mother did not prepare without reason. Lorraine Wallace did not react. She anticipated. And when she did, it was rarely for something small. Back at Matthew's apartment, the evening settled into its usual rhythm. He reviewed emails. Kendra changed into something comfortable and sat near the window, her laptop open but untouched. "You didn't ask what was in the folder," Matthew said after a while. Kendra looked up slightly. "You didn't seem interested." Matthew leaned back in his chair. "It didn't seem relevant." Kendra closed her laptop gently. "Not everything looks relevant at first," she said. Matthew studied her for a moment, then smiled faintly as if the conversation had already ended in his mind. "Maybe," he said. Kendra returned her gaze to the window. Outside, the city continued without pause. each light representing a story that did not need to announce itself to exist. Inside, something quieter was forming. Not conflict, not yet. Just alignment, shifting slowly, precisely into a shape that neither of them had fully named. But one of them had already begun to understand. The engagement did not begin with surprise. It began with timing. Matthew Reed chose a setting that had already been approved by the expectations he carried. A private rooftop overlooking the Chicago skyline, reserved in advance, lit with controlled warmth rather than spectacle. It was not excessive, but it was intentional in every detail. The kind of moment designed to look effortless while leaving nothing to chance. Kendra Wallace understood that before she arrived. She had noticed the shift in his schedule that week. The way he checked his phone more frequently, not out of anxiety, but coordination. The subtle increase in his attention to small details, reservations confirmed twice, conversations cut shorter than usual. None of it pointed directly to a proposal. But together, they formed a pattern. So when Matthew reached into his coat and brought out the ring, Kendra was not surprised. She was prepared, not with an answer, but with awareness. He spoke carefully about their future, about stability, about what they could build together. His words were well chosen, practiced enough to sound natural, structured enough to avoid uncertainty. He did not rush. He did not hesitate. Everything about the moment aligned with the version of himself he presented to the world. Kendra listened. She did not interrupt. She did not rush to fill the silence after he finished. She let the space exist long enough to understand what had been said and what had not. Matthew had not spoken about her mother. He had not mentioned the life she had come from or the parts of her that did not fit easily into his world. He spoke about partnership, but only within the structure he controlled. Stability, but defined by his terms. Kendra saw it, and still she said yes, not because she misunderstood him, but because she believed she understood enough. In the weeks that followed, their engagement unfolded in a way that felt seamless to everyone watching from the outside. Announcements were made, invitations discussed, venues considered. Matthew introduced Kendra to more of his professional circle, positioning her not just as his partner, but as part of his future image. She adapted where necessary. But she did not disappear. That distinction remained quiet, but it held. The first real point of tension surfaced during a dinner with Matthew's family. Diane Reed hosted it in her home, a place that reflected the same values her son carried: order, presentation, and a clear sense of hierarchy. Everything had its place, and every guest understood where they fit within it. Kendra arrived with Matthew dressed appropriately for the setting. Elegant but not overstated. She greeted Diane with warmth, received in return with a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. Lorraine Wallace was not invited. The reason was not stated directly. It didn't need to be. Dinner began with polite conversation, the kind that remained carefully within safe boundaries. Diane asked Kendra about her work, her plans, her expectations for the future. Each question was framed as interest, but carried an undertone of evaluation. Kendra answered simply, clearly, without offering more than what was asked. Matthew observed occasionally, stepping in to guide the conversation when it drifted too close to areas he preferred to avoid. At one point, Diane set down her glass and looked directly at Kendra. "And your mother?" she said. "Will she be involved in the wedding planning?" The question was neutral in structure. But the pause that followed it was not. Kendra did not answer immediately. She considered the intent behind the words, the tone, the timing. Then she spoke. "She'll be there," she said. Diane smiled lightly. "Of course, but I mean in terms of decisions, guest lists, formalities." Matthew shifted slightly beside her. "We've been handling most of that," he said, "to keep things streamlined." Kendra turned her head just enough to look at him. It was not confrontation. It was acknowledgement. Then she returned her attention to Diane. "She has her own way of being involved," Kendra said. Diane's smile remained. "I'm sure she does," she replied. The conversation moved on. But the boundary had been drawn. That night as they drove back, the silence between them carried weight. Matthew broke it first. "You could have been clearer," he said. Kendra looked ahead. "About what?" "About how much influence she'll actually have," he replied. Kendra rested her hand lightly on her lap. "She's my mother," she said, "not a variable." Matthew exhaled slowly. "It's not about removing her," he said. "It's about managing perception." Kendra did not respond immediately. She had heard that word before. Perception. It appeared often in Matthew's language, always positioned as something necessary, something to be maintained. But each time it was used, something else was quietly adjusted to fit it. "And who defines that?" she asked finally. Matthew glanced at her, then back to the road. "It's not one person," he said. "It's the environment we're in." Kendra let that settle. The environment, another structure, another system that required alignment. She did not argue further, not because she agreed, but because she was still observing. In the days that followed, the wedding planning accelerated. Venues were finalized, guest lists expanded, schedules tightened. Every detail moved forward with precision. Matthew handled logistics with efficiency, ensuring that nothing appeared uncertain. Kendra participated. She attended meetings, reviewed options, made selections. But she noticed which choices were truly open, and which ones were presented as options, but already decided. She adjusted accordingly. And all the while, Lorraine remained at a distance, not excluded entirely, but positioned at the edge of the process where involvement could be acknowledged without altering anything. Kendra visited her one afternoon weeks before the wedding. Lorraine's house was quiet, unchanged. The same light through the windows, the same steady rhythm of a place that did not adapt itself for others. They sat together at the kitchen table. "You've been busy," Lorraine said. Kendra nodded. "It's moving quickly." Lorraine studied her daughter's face, not searching for answers, but confirming what she already sensed. "And you?" she asked. Kendra met her gaze. "I'm watching," she said. Lorraine accepted that. After a moment, she stood and walked to the cabinet near the back wall. She opened it, reached inside, and brought out the same folder Matthew had noticed weeks earlier. This time, she placed it in front of Kendra. "You don't need this now," Lorraine said, "but you should know it exists." Kendra rested her hand lightly on the cover. "What is it?" she asked. "History," Lorraine replied. Kendra waited. Lorraine did not elaborate immediately. She gave the silent space to form its own meaning. "Not everything that supports something is visible," she added. Kendra nodded slowly. She did not open the folder. Not yet. Instead, she absorbed the weight of it, the timing, the intention, the quiet certainty behind her mother's words. "When will I need it?" Kendra asked. Lorraine's expression did not change. "When it becomes clear that what you're standing in isn't what it claims to be." Kendra leaned back slightly. That clarity had not fully arrived, but it was forming, and Lorraine knew it. They spoke about other things after that. Simple things, familiar things, the kind of conversation that does not need to prove anything to exist. But the folder remained on the table, present, waiting. Later that evening, as Kendra returned to the life she was building with Matthew, she carried something with her that had not been there before. Not doubt, not fear, but context. And context, once understood, does not disappear. It changes how everything else is seen. Matthew greeted her at the door. His expression relaxed, his tone easy. "Everything okay?" he asked. Kendra stepped inside, placing her bag down carefully. "Yes," she said, and she meant it, because nothing had broken. Not yet. But something had shifted. And this time, she was no longer the only one aware of it. The prenuptial agreement arrived without ceremony. It was delivered as a document, not a discussion. Matthew placed it on the dining table one evening after dinner, alongside 2 glasses that had not yet been cleared. He did not present it as a question. He introduced it as a step. "It's standard," he said, his tone measured, almost casual, given the scale of things. Kendra looked at the folder without touching it. "What scale?" she asked. Matthew gave a small, patient smile, the kind that softened explanation without changing its direction. "My assets, my position, the future we're stepping into." Kendra nodded once, as if acknowledging the structure of his answer rather than its substance. "And mine?" she asked. Matthew paused just long enough for the silence to become visible. "You're protected too," he said. "It works both ways." Kendra did not open the document that night. Instead, she asked for a copy to review with her own counsel. Matthew agreed without resistance. He expected that request. It aligned with the version of fairness he was comfortable presenting. But the following evening, when Kendra visited Lorraine, she did not bring the document immediately into conversation. They sat together in the living room, the soft hum of the television filling the space without being watched. Lorraine did not ask about the wedding. She did not ask about Matthew. She waited. Kendra eventually spoke. "He gave me a prenup," she said. Lorraine nodded once, as if confirming something already anticipated. "Did you read it?" she asked. "Not yet," Kendra replied. Lorraine turned slightly toward her. "Then don't decide anything about it yet," she said. "Read it first, slowly." Kendra studied her mother's face. "You don't seem surprised." "I'm not," Lorraine said. Because of him, Lorraine's expression remained steady. Because of the structure he lives in. Kendra absorbed that. Structure again. It was becoming a language of its own. Later that night, Kendra returned home and sat alone at the table where Matthew had left the document. The apartment was quiet. Matthew was in the study, speaking on the phone in a low, controlled voice. Kendra opened the folder. The agreement was thorough, carefully written, detailed in ways that suggested it had been reviewed more than once before reaching her. It outlined asset divisions, liability protections, and contingency clauses that extended beyond the present into projections of future growth. It protected Matthew. That was clear. But it also did something else more subtly. It defined Kendra's position within the marriage, not as a partner of equal origin, but as an addition to an existing system. Her contributions were acknowledged, but within limits. Her access was granted, but conditionally. And her independence, while not restricted, was framed as separate from the core structure Matthew controlled. Kendra read every line. She did not rush. She did not react. She noted. The next morning, she forwarded the document to an attorney Lorraine had once mentioned in passing, Charles Whitman. She did not explain the entire situation. She didn't need to. The document spoke for itself. By the afternoon, Charles responded. "Let's meet," his email said. "There are details here you should understand before you sign anything." Kendra scheduled the meeting. She told Matthew. He nodded, unsurprised. "That's smart," he said. "He's experienced." Kendra watched him for a moment. "You know him?" she asked. Matthew hesitated. "By reputation," he said. "He's been around a long time." Kendra held that answer in place. By the time she sat across from Charles Whitman 2 days later, the city outside his office had already moved through its morning rhythm. His office was not modern in the way Matthew preferred. It carried weight, instead dark wood paper files, a sense that things here were kept because they mattered, not because they looked right. Charles reviewed the document in silence for several minutes before speaking. "This is well written," he said. "Very thorough." Kendra waited. "But thorough doesn't always mean balanced," he continued. He began pointing out clauses. Some were expected: asset protection, premarital holdings, liability separation. Others were less obvious. Triggers, conditions, language that appeared neutral until applied under specific circumstances. Kendra listened carefully. "What happens if I don't sign?" she asked. Charles leaned back slightly. "That depends on him," he said. "But if this is presented as non-negotiable, then not signing becomes a statement." Kendra considered that. "And if I do sign," Charles met her gaze directly, "then you should understand exactly what you're agreeing to and what you're not being told." Kendra sat with that. Charles closed the document. "There are things that can be adjusted," he said, "if you want them to be." Kendra nodded slowly. "I'll think about it." She left the office without urgency. That evening, she returned to Lorraine's house again. This time, Lorraine was already seated at the table, the folder from before resting beside her. "You spoke to Charles," Lorraine said. Kendra did not ask how she knew. "Yes." Lorraine folded her hands lightly, and Kendra sat across from her. "It's not equal," she said. Lorraine nodded. "No," she replied. "It isn't." Kendra looked at the folder. "You said I'd know when to open it." Lorraine watched her, not instructing, not pushing. "Do you feel that now?" she asked. Kendra considered the question carefully. Then she reached forward and opened the folder. Inside were documents older than she expected. Bank records, transfer statements, agreements bearing signatures she recognized, and some she did not. Names connected across years, transactions linked in ways that were not immediately obvious but clearly intentional. Kendra turned a page slowly. "What is this?" she asked. Lorraine's voice remained calm. "Part of what built the stability he thinks is entirely his," she said. Kendra looked up. "He doesn't know," Lorraine shook her head. "Not fully." Kendra absorbed that. "And you never told him?" "No." Why, Lorraine's gaze did not waver. Because people reveal themselves more clearly when they believe they're standing on something they built alone. The room settled into silence. Kendra closed the folder gently. The weight of it had shifted, not into something heavy, but into something precise. She understood now that the agreement Matthew had placed in front of her was not just a legal document. It was a reflection of how he saw the world, of where he believed power came from, and of what he assumed would never be questioned. Kendra stood. "I'm going to review everything again," she said. Lorraine nodded. "Take your time." As Kendra stepped outside, the evening air felt unchanged. Nothing had exploded. Nothing had broken. But something had aligned. And once alignment becomes visible, it does not disappear. It waits. For the moment, it is needed. The week before the wedding unfolded with a kind of polished urgency that left no space for hesitation. Every hour had a purpose. Every movement was scheduled. Kendra Wallace moved through it all with quiet precision, her presence steady, her responses measured. To anyone observing, she was exactly what the moment required: composed, cooperative, and fully aligned with the structure that had been built around her. But alignment, she had learned, was not the same as agreement. It was during the second-to-last planning session at the venue that the pattern became impossible to ignore. The ballroom had already been arranged for a walkthrough. Tables set, lighting adjusted, place cards laid out in clean rows that reflected the hierarchy of the guest list more clearly than any spoken explanation ever could. Matthew stood near the center with the wedding planner reviewing final placements. Table 1 stays as is, he said, his tone calm but firm. Investors, partners, immediate family. The planner nodded, making notes. And the extended family, she asked. Matthew glanced briefly at the seating chart. Secondary tables, he said. Closer to the middle. Kendra stood a few steps away, listening. She didn't interrupt. The planner shifted slightly. And your fiancé's mother? Matthew didn't look up immediately. He traced a line across the chart with his finger, then stopped. Place her at table 9, he said. There was a pause. Table 9 was not offensive in number, but it was distant, far enough that visibility became optional. Kendra stepped forward. Why table 9? She asked. Matthew turned to her, his expression unchanged. It balances the room, he said. We need the front to reflect the primary relationships. Kendra looked at the chart. She's not a secondary relationship, she said. Matthew exhaled slightly, the first hint of tension surfacing. This isn't personal, he replied. It's structural. Kendra met his gaze. That's what you call it? Matthew held her eyes for a moment, then softened his tone. It's just about flow, he said. Perception. There it was again. Perception. Kendra nodded once. She did not argue further, but she did not step back either. The planners shifted uncomfortably, sensing the space between them, without understanding its full depth. Would you like me to make any adjustments? She asked carefully. Matthew answered before Kendra could respond. No, he said. It's fine. Kendra turned her attention back to the room. She walked slowly past the tables, reading the names, observing the placements, understanding not just where people would sit, but how they would be seen. When she reached table 9, she stopped. It was positioned near the edge of the room, close enough to be included, far enough to be overlooked. A place for presence, without influence. Kendra rested her hand lightly on the back of the chair assigned to Kendra Wallace. She didn't move it. She didn't change anything. She simply stood there long enough to understand what the placement represented. Later that evening, as they returned home, the conversation came without escalation. You didn't need to question it in front of the planner, Matthew said. Kendra removed her shoes, placing them neatly by the door. I asked a question, she replied. Matthew set his keys down. It put things in an unnecessary position, he said. Kendra looked at him. Unnecessary to who? Matthew didn't answer immediately. To the process, he said finally. Kendra nodded. And where does she fit into that process? She asked. Matthew's expression tightened just slightly. She's part of it, he said. Just not at the center. Kendra let that settle. Then she walked past him without another word. Silence once again carried more information than anything spoken. The following days continued in the same rhythm. Final fittings, vendor confirmations, guest arrivals. And with each step forward, Lorraine's presence was quietly adjusted. She received her invitation formally like any other guest. No special role, no speech, no acknowledgement beyond attendance. Kendra noticed every detail. She did not correct them. Not yet. Instead, she visited her mother 2 nights before the wedding. Lorraine's house remained unchanged, untouched by the urgency that filled Kendra's current life. The contrast was immediate. Kendra sat at the kitchen table, the same place where the folder had once been opened. You're seated at table 9, she said. Lorraine nodded as if she had already known. That sounds about right, she replied. Kendra studied her. You're not surprised. Lorraine poured 2 cups of tea, placing one in front of her daughter. People don't rearrange their values for a ceremony, she said. They reveal them more clearly. Kendra wrapped her hands around the cup, feeling the warmth without drinking. He thinks it's about structure, she said. Lorraine smiled faintly. People often rename things when they don't want to examine them too closely. Kendra looked down. I didn't change it. Lorraine sat across from her. I didn't ask you to. Kendra lifted her gaze. Should I have? Lorraine considered the question. What would it have changed, she asked. Kendra didn't answer immediately. The placement, she said. Lorraine shook her head gently. No, she replied. It would have changed the appearance of the placement, not the reason behind it. Kendra absorbed that. And the reason matters more, Lorraine continued. Because that's what stays. Silence returned, but it was not empty. It was full of understanding that no longer needed to be explained. After a moment, Lorraine stood and walked to the cabinet again. She did not take out the folder this time. Instead, she placed a small envelope on the table. Kendra looked at it. What is this? She asked. Something that will move when it needs to, Lorraine said. Kendra didn't open it. She didn't need to, not yet. Do you want to come? She asked quietly. Lorraine met her eyes. Yes, she said. I'll be there. There was no hesitation in her voice, no resentment, just certainty. Kendra nodded. That was enough. The night before the wedding, Kendra stood alone in the apartment looking out at the city. Matthew was in another room, on another call, managing something that required his attention. He always had something that required his attention. Kendra thought about the tables, about placement, about structure, and about the difference between being included and being valued. She didn't feel anger. She didn't feel fear. What she felt was clarity, not complete, but sufficient. Enough to recognize that the ceremony they were about to enter was not just a beginning. It was also a reveal. And some things once revealed could not be returned to what they were before. Behind her, Matthew ended his call and stepped into the room. Everything's set, he said. Kendra turned slightly. For tomorrow, she asked. Matthew nodded. Yes. Kendra looked at him for a moment. Then she gave a small, measured nod. Good, she said, because everything was set. Not just the tables, not just the schedule, but the alignment of every decision that had led to this point, and the consequences that would follow. The morning of the wedding arrived without hesitation. Chicago moved as it always did. Traffic building lights shifting across glass buildings, people stepping into their routines without pause. The city did not adjust itself for ceremonies. It continued indifferent to moments that felt permanent only to those inside them. Kendra Wallace woke before the alarm. She did not reach for her phone. She did not move immediately. She lay still, listening to the quiet of the room, to the faint hum of the city below, to the absence of anything that demanded urgency from her. There was no panic. There was no rush. Only a steady awareness that the day had arrived, exactly as it had been constructed to. Matthew was already awake. She could hear him in the other room, his voice low, measured, moving through details that required confirmation. He spoke in short sentences, precise and efficient, as if each word had been selected to prevent deviation. Even on his wedding day, there was no space for uncertainty. Kendra sat up slowly. She moved through the morning without resistance. Shower, dress, preparation. Each step completed not with excitement, but with clarity. The process had been rehearsed not emotionally, but structurally. She knew where to be, when to move, what to say, if asked. The bridal suite at the hotel was bright. Large windows, neutral tones controlled lighting that softened every surface. The makeup artist worked quietly. The stylist adjusted fabric and pins with practiced efficiency. There was conversation, but it remained light, contained within the boundaries of what the moment allowed. Kendra responded when spoken to. She smiled when appropriate. But her attention moved elsewhere. To details, to timing, to the way people entered and exited the room without fully meeting her eyes. Lorraine Wallace arrived mid-morning. She did not announce herself. She stepped into the room with the same calm she carried everywhere, her presence noticeable not because it demanded attention, but because it did not seek it. Her dress was simple. Dark, well-fitted, appropriate without being designed to stand out. Some of the stylists glanced at her briefly, then returned to their work. Kendra saw her immediately. Their eyes met across the room. No words were exchanged at first. Lorraine gave a small nod. Kendra returned it. That was enough. A few minutes later, as the room shifted and repositioned itself around the next stage of preparation, Lorraine moved closer. "You're ready," she said. Kendra looked at her reflection, then back at her mother. "Yes," she replied. Lorraine studied her for a moment. Not the dress, not the styling, her. Then she reached into her bag and handed Kendra the same small envelope from 2 nights before. "You should keep this with you," she said. Kendra accepted it without opening it. "Is it time?" she asked quietly. Lorraine's expression remained unchanged. "Not yet," she said, "but it's close enough that you shouldn't be without it." Kendra slipped the envelope into her clutch. No further explanation was needed. The ceremony itself passed without disruption. Guests filled the space in measured waves, their conversations blending into a low, controlled hum. The venue was elegant, designed to impress without appearing excessive. Everything reflected intention. Matthew stood at the front, composed, confident, entirely aligned with the role he had prepared for. When Kendra walked down the aisle, the room shifted. Not dramatically, but perceptibly. She moved with steady steps, her gaze forward, her posture aligned with the expectations placed upon her. There was no hesitation in her movement, no visible doubt, only presence. Matthew smiled as she approached, not broadly, but enough to signal that everything was proceeding as planned. The vows were exchanged, words spoken clearly without stumble, without deviation. Promises structured, carefully framed within the language of partnership and future. Kendra spoke her part with precision. She did not embellish. She did not falter. She completed the moment as it had been designed. And then it was done. Applause followed. Photos, movement, transition. The ceremony dissolved into the reception. The ballroom, already prepared, now filled with motion. Glassware catching light, conversations rising and falling, staff moving with practiced coordination. Kendra entered beside Matthew. They were introduced formally. Names spoken, titles implied. A room full of people responding to what they saw, not necessarily what existed beneath it. Matthew guided her through the initial greetings. Investors, colleagues, family. Each introduction carried weight measured in subtle ways, tone, duration, eye contact. Kendra responded as expected. She listened, she acknowledged, she adapted. But she did not lose track. Not of the room, not of the placement, not of the distance between where people stood and what they represented. She saw Lorraine across the room. Table 9, exactly as planned. Lorraine sat calmly, her posture relaxed, her attention present, but not searching. She did not attempt to move closer. She did not signal discomfort. She occupied the space given to her without resistance. Kendra held that image for a moment, then released it. The evening progressed. Speeches began. Matthew's colleagues spoke first, carefully constructed remarks that balanced humor with admiration. Stories that reinforced his image without revealing anything unscripted. Diane Reed followed. Her speech was polished, controlled. She spoke about family, about legacy, about the importance of alignment and values. She acknowledged Kendra, welcomed her formally, and referenced Lorraine only in passing, without detail. The room responded with polite approval. Kendra listened. She did not react. Matthew stood next. His speech was shorter, focused. He spoke about building something lasting, about partnership, about the future. He did not mention Lorraine, not once. Kendra noticed. Not because it was unexpected, but because it confirmed something. When the speeches ended, the music shifted. The atmosphere loosened slightly. Movement replaced structure, but not entirely, because structure once established does not disappear. It remains, waiting. Kendra moved through the room with the same quiet awareness she had carried all day. And somewhere within that awareness, something approached. Not sudden, not chaotic, but inevitable, because everything had been set. Not just the tables, not just the timing, but the alignment of choices that would soon no longer remain contained. And in that alignment, something was already beginning to move. Unseen, unspoken, but very close. The shift did not begin with raised voices. It began with a correction. A coordinator approached Kendra near the edge of the dance floor. Her tablet held close, her expression careful. "Excuse me," she said softly. "There's a small adjustment needed with the seating for the VIP section." Kendra turned slightly, her attention steady. "What kind of adjustment?" The coordinator hesitated, glancing briefly toward Matthew, who stood across the room in conversation with two investors and Diane Reed. "There's been a request," she said, "regarding access to the front tables during the next portion of the evening." Kendra followed her gaze. Matthew's posture had changed. Not dramatically, but enough. His shoulders were set more rigidly, his smile thinner, his attention divided between the conversation in front of him and something else just beyond it. Kendra already knew where this was going. She did not move immediately. Instead, she asked, "Who made the request?" The coordinator lowered her voice. "Mr. Reed," she said. "Of course." Kendra nodded once. "Thank you," she said. The coordinator stepped back, relieved to be released from the exchange. Kendra remained where she was for a moment longer. Then she walked. Not quickly, not slowly, with the same measured pace she had carried all evening. She reached Matthew just as the conversation he was in began to dissolve. The investors stepped away, leaving him with Diane, who leaned slightly toward him, her expression composed but intent. Kendra did not interrupt. She waited. Matthew noticed her, his attention shifting fully. "Everything okay?" he asked. Kendra met his eyes. "There's been a request," she said, "about the seating." Matthew's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "It's being handled," he replied. Kendra did not move, handled how Diane answered before he could. "Just a small correction," she said lightly. "Nothing for you to worry about." Kendra turned her gaze to her. "Then I won't worry," she said. "But I will understand." The room did not quiet. Music continued. Conversations flowed. But within the space between the three of them, something narrowed. Matthew exhaled slowly. "There's a sequence to how the evening is supposed to progress," he said. "Some people need to be closer to the front for the next segment." "And who needs to move?" Kendra asked. Matthew hesitated, not because he didn't know, but because saying it out loud would remove the last layer of distance between intention and action. "Your mother," he said. The words did not carry anger. They carried decision. Kendra held his gaze. To where she asked, "She?" Matthew glanced toward the back of the room. "There's space near the service corridor," he said. "It won't disrupt anything." Kendra did not look in that direction. She already understood what that meant. Service corridor, not just distance, removal. "And you think that's appropriate," she said. Matthew's expression shifted just slightly. "It's necessary," he replied. Kendra let the silence sit between them. Not long, but long enough. Then she nodded once. "I understand," she said. She turned. Matthew watched her, something in his posture suggesting he expected resistance, or at least a question that would force him to justify the decision more fully. But it did not come. Kendra walked across the room, not to the back, to table 9. Lorraine Wallace sat exactly where she had been placed. Her hands rested lightly in her lap. Her posture relaxed, her attention present, but not searching. She had observed the room without inserting herself into it the way she always did. Kendra approached and stopped beside her. Lorraine looked up. Their eyes met. There was no surprise in hers, only recognition. Kendra spoke quietly. "They're going to ask you to move," she said. Lorraine nodded once. "I thought they might," she replied. Kendra did not sit. She did not reach for her. She stood, allowing the information to exist without pressure. Where, Lorraine asked. Near the service corridor. Lorraine's expression did not change. "That's further than this," she said. "Yes." A pause. Then Lorraine stood, not abruptly, not reluctantly. She smoothed her dress once, a small, deliberate movement, then looked at her daughter. "You don't need to say anything," she said. Kendra's gaze remained steady. "I wasn't going to," she replied. Lorraine gave a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "I know." They walked together, across the ballroom, past the tables that mattered, past the ones that reflected proximity and influence, toward the edge. The space near the service corridor was different. The lighting shifted, softer in some places, harsher in others. The rhythm of the room changed, interrupted by the quiet efficiency of staff, moving in and out, carrying trays, adjusting details that supported the evening without being part of it. A small table had been set, not part of the original arrangement. Added, temporary. Lorraine stopped in front of it. She looked at the chair, then at the room behind them. Matthew was watching, not openly, but enough. Others had begun to notice. Not everyone, but enough. Moments like this did not require full attention to be understood. They only needed witnesses. Lorraine turned to Kendra. "You should go back," she said. Kendra did not move. Lorraine's voice remained calm. "This isn't where you stand tonight," she continued. Kendra held her gaze. "And where do you stand?" she asked. Lorraine considered the question. "Exactly where I need to," she said. Kendra nodded once, then she stepped back. Not away, but into her own place within the room. Lorraine sat. The chair did not fit the table perfectly. It had been placed quickly, function over form. Kendra turned and walked back. Matthew met her halfway. "It's done," he said quietly. Kendra looked at him. "Yes," she replied. Matthew searched her expression, expecting something: anger, disappointment, anything that would confirm the weight of what had just happened. But her face remained unchanged. Calm, present, unmoved. "It was the right call," he said. Kendra held his gaze. "For what?" she asked. Matthew didn't answer immediately. "For the room," he said finally. Kendra nodded once. Then she looked past him. Not at the tables, not at the guests, at the structure of the evening itself. Everything was still in place. Nothing had broken. But something had been made visible. Not loudly, not dramatically, but clearly. And once something becomes clear, it does not return to ambiguity. Matthew turned slightly, re-engaging with the room, already moving forward, already continuing as if the moment had passed. For him it had. For Kendra, it had not. Because what had just happened was not an interruption. It was a confirmation of pattern, of priority, of truth. And somewhere beyond the ballroom, something else had already begun to respond. Not with noise, not with confrontation, but with movement, precise, documented, already in motion before this moment fully formed. And now no longer waiting. The room did not stop. Music continued. Glasses were refilled. Conversations resumed their rhythm, as if nothing essential had shifted. For most of the guests, the evening remained intact, preserved within the boundaries of what they could see and what they chose not to question. But perception, once fractured, does not fully repair. It lingers. Kendra Wallace moved through the reception with the same composed presence she had maintained from the beginning. She did not avoid the center of the room, nor did she seek it. She existed within it precisely where she needed to be, acknowledging conversations without allowing them to anchor her. A few guests had noticed, not the full context, not the structure behind the decision, but enough to feel that something had been displaced. A glance here, a pause there, a question left unspoken between two people who understood more than they said. Kendra registered each of these moments. She did not respond to them. Instead, she followed the evening as it unfolded step by step without interruption. Matthew, for his part, had already recalibrated. He stood near the front tables again, engaged in conversation with a senior partner whose presence carried weight beyond the event itself. His posture was controlled, his tone measured. If there had been tension, it had been absorbed and repurposed into composure. Diane Reed remained close. She monitored the room with quiet attention, her gaze moving across guest staff and subtle disruptions. When her eyes passed briefly over the service corridor, she did not linger. There was no need. The structure had been restored. At least that was the assumption. Kendra's phone vibrated once in her hand. She had not realized she was holding it. The screen lit briefly, then dimmed. She did not check it immediately. Instead, she excused herself from the conversation she was in with a polite nod and stepped toward the edge of the ballroom, where the light shifted slightly and the sound softened just enough to create space. Then she looked. The message was from an unfamiliar email address. No subject line, no greeting, just a single forwarded thread. Kendra opened it. The first thing she noticed was the timestamp. It had been sent less than 10 minutes ago. The second thing she noticed was the name at the top, Charles Whitman. Her eyes moved quickly but precisely across the content. Attached were documents, bank records, transfer confirmations, legal correspondence, and beneath them a short line of text. Proceeding as authorized. Kendra did not react. She read each page, her attention narrowing as the structure of what she was seeing began to align with what she already knew. The transfers dated back years, not recent, not incidental, intentional, layered, connected to entities that appeared at first glance unrelated. But they were not. Each one traced back eventually to a point of origin, Lorraine Wallace. Kendra closed the email. She did not respond. She did not move immediately. She stood there, her phone still in her hand, the weight of the information settling not as shock, but as confirmation. This had not begun tonight. Tonight had only activated it. Across the room, Matthew laughed at something someone said. The sound carried lightly, unaffected. Kendra watched him for a moment. Then she turned, not toward him, toward the service corridor. Lorraine sat exactly where she had been placed. The table remained slightly misaligned, the lighting uneven. Staff moved behind her in quiet patterns, their presence constant but peripheral. Lorraine's posture had not changed. She held a glass in one hand, untouched, her gaze directed toward the room, not searching, not avoiding, present. Kendra approached and stopped beside her. Lorraine looked up. "You've received something," she said. It was not a question. Kendra nodded once. Yes. Lorraine studied her face not for emotion, but for clarity. And she asked. Kendra held her gaze. "It's moving," she said. Lorraine inclined her head slightly. "Good." There was no satisfaction in her voice, no urgency, just acknowledgement. Kendra glanced briefly toward the main floor. "He doesn't know," she said. Lorraine followed her gaze. "No," she replied. "He doesn't." A pause. Then Kendra asked quietly, "When will he?" Lorraine considered the question. Soon enough that it won't feel like control, she said, but not so soon that it becomes noise. Kendra understood. This was not about confrontation. It was about sequence. She sat down briefly beside her mother, not fully settling, but lowering herself just enough to shift the moment. I didn't stop it, Kendra said. Lorraine's expression remained steady. I know. Kendra's fingers rested lightly against the edge of the table. I saw it, she continued. Before it happened. Lorraine did not respond immediately. Then she said, and now you see more. Kendra nodded. Yes. They sat in silence for a few seconds. Not long, but long enough. Then Kendra stood. I'm going back, she said. Lorraine inclined her head. I'll be here, she replied. Kendra turned and walked back into the center of the room. The music had shifted again. Faster now, lighter, the kind of transition designed to signal movement, to encourage the room to forget what came before and engage with what was in front of it. Matthew saw her approaching. He stepped toward her, a glass in his hand. Everything all right? He asked. Kendra met his eyes. Yes, she said. Matthew searched her face for a moment. There was nothing there he could identify as disruption. No visible change. No indication that anything beyond the immediate room had shifted. Good, he said. He offered her the glass. She took it. Their fingers brushed briefly, a gesture that to anyone watching signaled connection, unity, continuity. Kendra held the glass without drinking. Matthew leaned slightly closer. We'll move into the next segment soon, he said. There's a presentation I want to get through before people start leaving. Kendra nodded. A presentation, Matthew smiled faintly. Just something brief, he said. A way to thank everyone. Set the tone. Kendra understood what that meant. Control, narrative. Framing the evening in a way that aligned with his image. She looked at him. For who, she asked. Matthew's expression did not shift. For everyone, he said. Kendra held his gaze for a moment longer. Then she nodded once. Of course, she said, because the structure was still in place. The sequence still moving. The room still responding to what it could see. But beyond that room, beyond the music and the light and the careful arrangement of people and power, something else had already begun to unfold. Not visibly, not yet, but soon. And when it reached this space, it would not arrive as interruption. It would arrive as consequence. The morning after the wedding did not carry the weight Matthew expected. He woke early, not from restlessness, but from habit. The room was still the curtains, only partially drawn, allowing a thin line of daylight to cut across the floor. For a moment, everything felt intact. The event had concluded. The structure had held. The image from his perspective remained preserved. He reached for his phone. Emails had already begun to accumulate. Congratulatory messages. Follow-ups. Introductions initiated during the reception. It was the natural extension of an evening designed not just as a celebration, but as positioning. Matthew moved through them efficiently, acknowledging, responding, flagging what required attention. Then he stopped. One email stood apart, not in volume, in tone. The subject line was neutral. Account verification notice. He opened it. The message was brief, routine on the surface, but the language carried something else. Temporary restriction, pending review. Matthew read it once. Then again. He sat up slightly, the sheet falling away from his shoulder. Temporary restriction, pending review. The account referenced was not incidental. It was one of the central operational accounts tied to a series of investments he managed directly. It was not supposed to be interrupted without cause. He checked the timestamp, sent at 7:12 a.m. He glanced at the clock. 7:18. too recent to dismiss. He stood already reaching for his jacket. In the adjoining space, Kendra was awake, not moving, watching. She had been awake before him, not because of the email, but because the shift she expected had arrived on time. Matthew moved quickly, his attention already narrowing toward resolution. "I need to make a call," he said. Kendra nodded. "Of course." Her voice was steady, unchanged. Matthew stepped into the other room, the door closing with a quiet click. Kendra remained where she was. She reached for her phone. No new messages, nothing urgent. Everything that needed to move had already been set in motion. She did not open the thread from the night before. She did not need to. Instead, she sat up slowly and walked to the window. The city outside had resumed its rhythm. People moving, cars passing. Nothing reflecting what had begun beneath the surface. Behind her, Matthew's voice rose slightly. Not loud, but sharper. "Who initiated this?" he asked. A pause. "No, I'm looking at it now. That doesn't make sense." Another pause. Kendra did not turn around. She listened without appearing to. The cadence of his speech had changed. Less controlled, more reactive. He was no longer managing perception. He was responding to disruption. Kendra rested her hand lightly against the glass. The cool surface grounded her. She closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them. Behind her, the call ended. Matthew stepped back into the room. His expression had shifted. Not dramatically, but enough. "There's a review on one of the accounts," he said. Kendra turned. "Why?" Matthew shook his head. "They're not giving specifics yet," he said. "Just saying it's procedural." Kendra held his gaze. "And you believe that?" Matthew hesitated, then exhaled. "No." Kendra nodded once. Silence followed. Not heavy, not strained, just present. Matthew reached for his phone again, scrolling through messages, already moving to the next step. "I need to go into the office," he said. "There are a few things I want to check directly." Kendra didn't object. "All right." Matthew paused. He looked at her more closely now, as if noticing something he had not before. "You're not asking questions," he said. Kendra met his eyes. "You're already asking them," she replied. Matthew held her gaze for a moment, then nodded. "Yeah," he said. He turned away, already gathering what he needed. Within minutes, he was gone. The door closed. The apartment returned to stillness. Kendra did not move immediately. She stood there, allowing the space to settle. Then she walked back to the table and picked up her phone. This time she opened the thread. Charles Whitman's message remained unchanged. The attachments were still there. The same sequence, the same structure. But now there was context. The first step had been taken. Kendra scrolled further down. A second message had arrived. Time-stamped minutes after the first. Secondary institutions notified. Kendra read it once, then closed the phone. She did not respond. She did not forward it. She did not need to, because the process did not require her participation at this stage. It required her awareness. Nothing more. Across the city, Matthew entered his office building with a different posture than the one he had carried the night before. The confidence remained. But it was now accompanied by something else. Focus, not outward, inward. He moved directly to his office, bypassing casual greetings, ignoring the usual rhythm of morning interactions. Once inside, he shut the door and called again. This time, the response came faster. "Yes, I'm here now," he said. "Walk me through it." He listened. His expression tightened. "Which transactions?" Another pause. Matthew leaned forward slightly. "That doesn't align with our records," he said. He opened his laptop, pulling up internal systems, cross-referencing data, moving quickly through information he knew well. But the alignment he expected did not appear. The numbers were there, the records existed, but their origin? That was different. He scrolled, clicked, opened another file, then another. The pattern began to shift. Not entirely, but enough. Enough to create uncertainty. Matthew sat back. For the first time that morning, he did not immediately move to the next step. He paused, because what he was seeing did not match what he believed he controlled. And that difference, that small but growing gap, was not something he had prepared for. Back in the apartment, Kendra prepared to leave. Not for work, not yet. For something else. She dressed simply. No excess, no adjustment. Then she picked up her bag and stepped outside. Her destination was familiar. Lorraine's house. The drive was quiet. Traffic moved as expected. Nothing signaled urgency. But Kendra understood the timing. When she arrived, Lorraine was already at the table. The same place, the same position. As if the day had been waiting, Kendra stepped inside. Lorraine looked up. "It's begun," she said. Kendra nodded. "Yes." Lorraine gestured to the chair across from her. "Sit," Kendra did. They did not rush into explanation. They did not dissect each detail, because both of them already understood the structure. "This is only the first layer," Lorraine said. Kendra held her gaze. "I know." Lorraine folded her hands. "He'll try to resolve it quickly," she continued. "He'll believe it's procedural, temporary." Kendra nodded. "And it's not." Lorraine's expression remained steady. "No." Silence followed, but it was not empty. It was filled with movement that did not require words. Outside, the city continued. Inside, something far more precise had already taken hold, and Matthew Reed, for the first time, was no longer the one directing it. By mid-morning, the word procedural had lost its usefulness. Matthew Reed sat in his office with 2 screens open and 3 calls queued each one, promising clarity and delivering only fragments. The account that had triggered the first notice was no longer the only one under review. A second institution had placed a hold on a related line. A third had requested documentation that should have been redundant if the underlying structure were as clean as he believed it to be. He moved faster, pulled files, cross-checked dates, opened archive statements he had not needed to revisit in years. The data existed. It always had. But now the relationships between those data points refused to align in a way that preserved control. "Walk me through the origin," he said into the phone voice, flat, precise. A pause on the other end. "Initial capitalization on that vehicle traces back to a private transfer," the analyst replied. "We're verifying the source chain." Matthew leaned forward. "We've verified that chain before." "Yes," the analyst said. "But the verification relied on representations that are now being re-examined." "By who?" Another pause. "External counsel." Matthew closed his eyes for a brief second, then opened them. "Name?" "It's in the notice you received." Matthew ended the call before the analyst could continue. He didn't need the answer repeated. He had already seen it. Whitman and Hale, LLP. Charles Whitman did not send signals without sequence. Matthew sat back, his attention narrowing. This was not random, not routine, not an error. This was a re-entry into something older. He opened a separate folder, one he had not accessed since the early phase of his career. The naming conventions were dated the structure less refined than what he used now. But the contents remained. He scanned quickly. Agreements, bridge financing notes, short-term liquidity arrangements that had allowed a previous venture, his father's, to stabilize at a critical moment. He had inherited the structure improved, it expanded it. The narrative had always been clean, a difficult start, followed by disciplined growth. He had not questioned the earliest layer. He had not needed to, until now. A line item caught his attention, a transfer marked only with initials. LW. Matthew stared at it. The date preceded his full involvement, before he had control, before the system had been fully his. He clicked into the underlying document. Restricted. Access required elevated authorization. Matthew frowned. That was new. He tried again. Denied. He sat back slowly. For the first time, the possibility formed not as theory, but as structure. Someone else had been in the foundation. Not adjacent. Inside. Across the city, Kendra Wallace sat at Lorraine's kitchen table, the same document spread between them in a quieter, more deliberate order. Charles Whitman had joined them by phone. His voice carried through the speaker measured exact, uninterested in anything beyond precision. "The review has been formally initiated," he said. "We've provided documentation sufficient to trigger compliance checks across 3 institutions." Kendra listened. Lorraine did not interrupt. "The key is sequence." Charles continued. "We're not alleging. We're clarifying. The records will do the work." Kendra's gaze moved across the pages. Bank statements, transfer confirmations, correspondence that predated her understanding of Matthew's world. "Explain the condition," she said. Charles paused briefly. "The original capital support was extended with a protective clause," he replied. "It required good faith conduct toward the beneficiary, your mother, and by extension you." Kendra absorbed that. "And what defines a violation public conduct that materially degrades standing?" Charles said, "particularly when it is deliberate and witnessed." Kendra did not look up. The reception, the room, the relocation, the words, all of it aligned. "And the remedy?" she asked. "Reversion rights," Charles said. "Control shifts. Certain assets become contestable. Access is restricted pending resolution." Kendra nodded once. "And he can't override it?" "No," Charles replied. "Not without addressing the underlying clause. And the documentation is comprehensive." Lorraine's hands remained folded. "He'll try to negotiate," she said quietly. He may. Charles agreed. But the leverage has already moved. Kendra closed one of the folders gently. She did not feel urgency. She felt clarity. "This doesn't need to escalate publicly," she said. "It won't," Charles replied. "Unless he forces it." Kendra considered that. Then she said, "He won't understand it yet." Lorraine looked at her. "No," she said, "he won't." Back in his office, Matthew placed a call he had not made in years. The line connected on the second ring. Whitman came the voice. Matthew did not introduce himself. "You initiated a review," he said. A brief silence. Mr. Reed, Charles replied, tone unchanged. "Good morning." "What is this?" Matthew asked. "A compliance process," Charles said. "Based on documentation we've maintained for some time." Matthew's jaw tightened. "You're disrupting active accounts. We're clarifying ownership structures," Charles corrected. Matthew leaned forward. "Those structures are settled." "Some of them are," Charles said. "Some require verification." Matthew paused, then said, "You're overreaching." Charles did not respond immediately. "Then we are within the terms." Matthew's gaze hardened. "What terms?" Another brief pause. "Ones your family accepted," Charles said, "and benefited from." Matthew's fingers pressed against the desk. "That was years ago." "Yes," Charles said, "which is why the records are so clear." Matthew exhaled slowly. "Why now?" The answer came without hesitation. "Because a condition has been met." Matthew's mind moved quickly. Conditions, triggers, public conduct, witnesses, the reception, Lorraine, the repositioning. He did not speak for a moment. Then, "You're tying this to a social event, I'm tying it to behavior," Charles said. "Observed and documented." Matthew's expression shifted. Not confusion, recognition. "You're making this about perception," he said. "No," Charles replied, "about consequence." The line went quiet. Matthew ended the call. He sat there, the room around him unchanged, but the structure within it altered. For years he had believed the foundation was stable because he had reinforced it, because he had expanded it, because he had managed it. He had not considered that the foundation itself had terms. Terms he had not set. Terms he had not revisited. Terms that did not respond to his control. Across the city, Kendra stood by the window in Lorraine's living room. The documents had been closed, the calls completed. Nothing more needed to be initiated. She looked out at the street. Cars passed. Neighbors moved through their routines. Everything appeared ordinary. Behind her, Lorraine spoke. "He'll understand soon," she said. Kendra did not turn. "Yes," she replied. Lorraine's voice remained calm. "And when he does, he'll try to change the terms." Kendra's reflection in the glass held steady. "He can't," she said. Lorraine nodded. "No." Kendra turned then, not with urgency, with decision. "What happens next?" she asked. Lorraine met her gaze. "We let it continue," she said, "exactly as it's structured to." Kendra absorbed that. No acceleration, no interference, just process. She nodded once. All right, because the shift had already occurred. Not in the room, not in the words, but in the alignment of power that no longer required explanation. And Matthew Reed, for the first time, was not outside that alignment. He was inside it, without control. By early afternoon, the narrative Matthew Reed had relied on began to thin. Not collapse, not yet, but thin enough that the structure beneath it could be seen through. He had spent hours moving between calls documents and internal systems, trying to restore alignment through familiarity. That had always worked before. When something shifted, he adjusted. When something resisted, he applied pressure. The system responded because he understood it. This time, it did not. The compliance flags did not clear when he provided additional documentation. The institutions did not revert to routine when he escalated through his usual contacts. Each attempt to stabilize the situation revealed another layer that required verification. And verification, he was beginning to understand, was not neutral. It was directional. It moved toward origin, toward source, toward something he had never needed to fully examine. A notification appeared on his screen, a forwarded link. He didn't recognize the sender at first. Then he did. One of the guests from the reception. He opened it. A video. Short, unedited, taken from across the ballroom. The angle was imperfect, slightly obstructed by movement in the foreground. But the audio was clear enough. Matthew watched. He saw himself, standing near the front tables, his posture controlled, his voice low but not private. "Move her," he heard himself say. The frame shifted slightly. Kendra was there, still listening. Near the service corridor, his voice continued. "It won't disrupt anything." The camera wavered. Someone moved in front of it. Then the image returned. Lorraine, standing, turning, walking. No resistance, no argument. Just movement. Away. Matthew stopped the video. He did not replay it. He did not need to. The content was not the issue. The context was. He set the phone down slowly. For a moment, the room felt smaller, not physically, structurally, as if the space he occupied had been redefined without his input. Another notification followed. This time from a colleague. Brief. "Everything all right?" "Hearing some noise about compliance reviews." Matthew stared at the message. Noise. That was how it began. Not with accusation, with awareness. He typed a response. Routine, being handled. He sent it. Then deleted the video. Not from the thread, from the device. The action was immediate, reflexive, as if removal could restore control. It did not. Because the video had not created the situation. It had recorded it. And what had been recorded was now part of the structure moving against him. Across the city, Kendra Wallace sat in her office for the first time since the wedding. Her desk remained as she had left it, organized, undisturbed. The familiar rhythm of the workspace contrasted with the shift unfolding elsewhere. Her colleagues greeted her with quiet curiosity, careful not to intrude. "How was the wedding one?" asked lightly. Kendra gave a small, measured smile. "Completed," she said. The answer was enough. They did not press further. Kendra sat down and opened her laptop. Emails had accumulated. She moved through them with the same discipline she always had, responding where needed, flagging what required attention, ignoring what did not. There was no visible disruption in her work, no indication that anything beyond the ordinary had changed. But beneath that surface, her awareness had sharpened. She checked her phone. No new messages from Charles, none from Lorraine. That was expected. The process did not require constant updates. It required completion. She returned to her screen, focused, present, aligned with the part of her life that did not depend on Matthew's structure. By mid-afternoon, the first external inquiry reached Matthew's firm. It came not as a demand, but as a request for clarification. An institutional partner asking for confirmation on a transaction that had now been flagged across multiple channels. Matthew's assistant knocked lightly on his door. "There's a call you might want to take," she said. Matthew nodded. "Put it through." He straightened slightly, adjusting his tone before the line connected. Matthew Reed. The voice on the other end was familiar, measured, professional. "We're reviewing some historical positions," the partner said. "Need to confirm a few details on origin funding." Matthew leaned back. "We've provided documentation," he said. "Yes," the partner replied. "But we're seeing discrepancies in how those positions were represented versus how they were initially structured." Matthew's gaze fixed on the far wall. "There are no discrepancies," he said. A pause. Then, "We're not suggesting misconduct, just clarification." Matthew understood the language. Neutral, controlled, but moving. "Send me what you need," he said. "We will." The call ended. Matthew remained still for a moment. Then he stood, walked to the window, looked out at the city that had, until this point, reflected his control back to him. Now it did not. Because control, he was beginning to realize, had never been absolute. It had been conditional. And those conditions had been set long before he believed they existed. He turned back to his desk, picked up his phone, scrolled, found Kendra's name. He hesitated, not because he didn't know what to say, but because he did. And none of it would restore what had already shifted. Still he called. Across the city, Kendra's phone vibrated once on her desk. She looked at the screen. Matthew. She let it ring twice, then answered. "Hello." Matthew's voice was controlled, but thinner now. "Are you at work?" "Yes." A pause. Then, "We need to talk." Kendra leaned back slightly in her chair. "We can," she said. Matthew exhaled. "There are complications," he said. Kendra did not interrupt. "They're reviewing accounts," he continued, "questioning origin structures. It doesn't align with what we've been operating under." Kendra listened. "And you think I can help?" she asked. Another pause. "I think you might understand something I don't," he said. Kendra's gaze remained steady. "I understand what's been documented," she replied. Matthew's grip on the phone tightened. "Then tell me," he said. Kendra did not answer immediately. She allowed the silence to exist, not as resistance, but as structure. Then she said, "It's already being told." Matthew closed his eyes briefly. "That's not an answer." Kendra's voice did not change. "It's the only one that matters right now." The line went quiet. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Matthew said, "I'll come by tonight." Kendra considered that, then replied, "You can." She ended the call, not abruptly, not gently, just completely. She placed the phone back on the desk and returned to her work. Because the conversation had not been about resolution, it had been about position. And positions once shifted do not return to where they were. By the time evening settled over the city, the process had moved beyond discretion. Not publicly, not in headlines or statements, but within the systems that defined access credibility and continuity. The shift was now visible to those who knew how to read it. Matthew Reed arrived at the apartment later than he had planned. The delay had not been logistical. It had been structural. Every attempt to stabilize the situation had revealed another layer requiring explanation. Meetings that should have been brief extended. Calls that should have resolved questions generated more of them. And at each point, the same phrase returned, reshaped but consistent pending verification. He entered without hesitation. Kendra was already there. Not waiting in the sense he expected, not positioned for confrontation. She sat at the dining table, her laptop open, a document on the screen that held her attention without urgency. The room was quiet, ordered, unchanged. Matthew closed the door behind him and set his keys down with more force than necessary. "We need to be clear about what's happening," he said. Kendra looked up. "All right." Her tone did not rise to meet his. It remained level. Matthew walked toward the table but did not sit immediately. "There are compliance reviews across multiple institutions," he said. "Accounts are being restricted, transactions delayed. It's not isolated." Kendra listened. "I know," she said. Matthew paused. "You know, not a question, a recognition." Kendra met his gaze. "Yes." Matthew's jaw tightened. "Then explain it." Kendra closed her laptop slowly. Not to end the task, to shift the conversation. "It's already being explained," she said. Matthew exhaled sharply. "By lawyers," he said. "By people who aren't giving me full access to the information." "They are giving you access," Kendra replied. "To the parts that apply to you." Matthew leaned forward slightly. "That's not how this works." Kendra tilted her head just enough to acknowledge the statement without accepting it. "It is now," she said. The room held the words without absorbing them. Matthew stepped back, then finally sat, across from her. For the first time since the wedding, they occupied the same space, without a defined structure guiding them. No guests, no expectations, no audience, just position. "Start at the beginning," he said. Kendra folded her hands lightly on the table. "The beginning didn't start with you," she replied. Matthew's eyes narrowed. "I'm aware of that," he said. "But I need to understand what I'm dealing with now." Kendra studied him for a moment. Not his words, his posture, the way his certainty had adjusted, not disappeared. "You're dealing with terms," she said. "What terms on capital that supported your early structure?" Matthew shook his head. "That was resolved years ago." Kendra's expression did not change. "It was acknowledged," she said, "not resolved." Matthew leaned back. "That's a distinction without a difference." Kendra let a brief silence form before responding. "Not when conditions are attached," she said. Matthew's gaze sharpened. "What conditions?" Kendra held it. "Good faith conduct," she said. "Toward the originating party." Matthew's mind moved quickly. Originating party. He did not say the name, but he knew it. That's not enforceable in this context, he said. It is, Kendra replied. When it's documented. Matthew's hands pressed lightly against the table. This is being stretched, he said. Reinterpreted. Kendra shook her head once. It's being applied, she said. The distinction landed, not loudly, but clearly. Matthew stood again. Movement returned. Pacing, repositioning. The need to reassert control through motion. This is about the reception, he said. Kendra did not respond immediately. Then it's about behavior. Matthew stopped, turned. Behavior at a private event. Kendra's gaze remained steady. With witnesses, she said. Matthew exhaled. That's not a legal trigger. Kendra's voice did not rise. It is she said when it was written to be. The room settled into something quieter, more precise. Matthew looked at her as if recalculating. You knew, he said. Not a question, a conclusion. Kendra did not deny it. I understood enough, she replied. Matthew took a step closer. Before the wedding, yes, and you didn't say anything. Kendra's expression remained unchanged. There was nothing to say, she said. Matthew's voice sharpened. You let this happen. Kendra met the edge of it without reacting. No, she said. You did. The words did not carry accusation. They carried placement. Matthew held her gaze, then looked away. For a moment, the room lost its structure entirely. Not because something new had been introduced, but because what had been hidden was now visible. And visibility changes how space functions. Matthew moved back to the table. Sat again, slower this time. What happens next? He asked. Kendra considered the question. Verification continues, she said. Access remains restricted. Control shifts where it needs to. Matthew nodded once. And if I challenge it, Kendra did not hesitate. You'll have to address the terms, she said. Matthew's expression tightened. And if I do? Kendra held his gaze. Then it becomes something else, she said. Matthew leaned back. Silence followed, longer this time, not empty, full of calculation, of recognition, of something he had not accounted for. Finally, he spoke. This didn't have to happen. Kendra did not respond immediately. Then she said it already had. Matthew looked at her. Understanding did not arrive all at once. It moved, slowly, through structure, through sequence, through consequence. And in that movement, something shifted, not dramatically, but permanently, because control, once revealed as conditional, cannot return to certainty. Matthew stood, not abruptly, not with purpose, just to change position. I need to think, he said. Kendra nodded. You should. He moved toward the door, paused, then said without turning, I'll be at the office. Kendra did not respond. The door closed. The apartment returned to stillness. Kendra remained at the table. She did not reopen her laptop. She did not reach for her phone. She sat, allowing the moment to complete itself, not emotionally, structurally. Because what had happened was not an argument, not a confrontation, not even a decision. It was a clarification of terms, of alignment, of position. And once those are clear, everything that follows no longer needs to be forced. The meeting was scheduled without announcement. No formal invitations, no circulating agenda. Just a sequence of confirmations sent quietly between offices that understood what required presence and what required discretion. Matthew Reed arrived 10 minutes early. He chose the conference room at the far end of the firm's floor, not the main boardroom. Smaller, more contained. A space that limited exposure without diminishing importance. 2 representatives from the primary financial institution were already seated when he entered. A third arrived shortly after compliance based on the tone of the introductions. Their expressions were neutral, professional, shaped by experience rather than curiosity. Matthew greeted them with measured composure. No acknowledgement of strain, no visible adjustment. He took his seat. "Thank you for coming," he said. One of the representatives inclined his head slightly. "We appreciate the opportunity to clarify," he replied. "Clarify, not resolve, not settle." Matthew noted the distinction. A few minutes later, the door opened again. Charles Whitman entered without urgency. He did not carry visible files. He did not perform the presence of authority. It existed without reinforcement. Behind him, a junior associate placed a thin folder on the table and stepped back. Charles took a seat opposite Matthew. Their eyes met briefly. No greeting beyond acknowledgement, no need. Everything that needed to be said had already been initiated. The room settled. The compliance officer spoke first. "We're here to review the origin and conditional structure of certain capital positions," she said. "Specifically those linked to early-stage stabilization of Reed Holdings." Matthew remained still. "Those positions have been disclosed and reviewed previously," he said. Charles did not respond. The compliance officer nodded. "They have," she said. "But recent submissions have introduced documentation that requires re-verification." Matthew turned slightly toward Charles. "You're referring to those submissions," he said. Charles folded his hands lightly. "We provided records that complete the chain," he replied. Matthew's expression remained controlled. The chain was already complete. Charles's gaze did not shift. "It was sufficient," he said, "not complete." The distinction settled into the room. One of the financial representatives opened the folder. Inside were copies. Not summaries, not excerpts. Original documents, transfer confirmations bearing dates that predated Matthew's direct involvement. Correspondence that outlined intent, not just execution. Signatures that tied obligations to behavior, not just performance. The representative placed one page forward. "This is the initial transfer," he said. "From Lorraine Wallace." Matthew did not look at it immediately. He already knew. He had seen the initials. Now they had a name, a source, a position. The amount was structured as private stabilization capital, the representative continued. "Extended under specific conditions." Matthew leaned forward slightly. "Conditions that were acknowledged at the time," he said. Charles spoke then. "Acknowledged," he said, "and accepted." Matthew's gaze sharpened. "Accepted by my father," he said. Charles inclined his head. "Yes," Matthew held that. Then said, "Which does not bind subsequent operational control." Charles did not respond immediately. "Then it binds the structure that operational control depends on." Silence. The compliance officer stepped in. "The language here is explicit," she said, referencing the document. "Good faith conduct toward the originating party is a condition of continuity." Matthew exhaled slowly. "That's not enforceable in practical terms," he said. The representative across from him met his gaze. "It becomes enforceable when a breach is documented," he said. Matthew's eyes moved briefly to Charles. Then back. "And you believe there's a breach?" Charles did not answer. He did not need to. The associate stepped forward slightly and placed a second item on the table. A tablet, the screen already active. The video, the same one Matthew had seen earlier. No edits, no framing, just sequence. Matthew did not reach for it. He did not need to. He could hear it without sound, see it without watching. "Is this the basis?" he asked. Charles's voice remained even. "It is part of it," he said. The compliance officer spoke again. "Public conduct observed and recorded that materially degrades the standing of the originating party," she said. "That meets the threshold defined in the agreement." Matthew leaned back. The room did not close in, but it did narrow. "This is being interpreted," he said. Charles met his gaze. "It's being applied. The same word. Again." Matthew let the silence extend. Not to resist, to calculate. "What does application look like?" he asked in operational terms. The representative answered. "Temporary restriction of access to affected positions," he said. "Review of control structures. Potential reversion of certain rights pending resolution." Matthew nodded once. "And resolution requires what Charles spoke. Addressing the condition," he said. Matthew held his gaze. "In what form?" Charles did not hesitate. "Good faith restoration," he said. Matthew's expression did not change. "That's not a defined action. It is," Charles replied. "Within the terms." Another pause. Matthew looked down at the documents, then back up. "What happens if I contest this?" he asked. The compliance officer answered. "The review continues," she said, "with expanded scope." Matthew absorbed that. Not escalation, expansion. Different. More difficult to contain. He sat back. The decision did not arrive as a moment. It unfolded, piece by piece. Through structure, through limitation, through recognition, finally he spoke. "I'll need time to review," he said. Charles inclined his head slightly. "Of course." The meeting concluded without formality. No closing statements, no resolution, just movement. Papers collected, devices powered down, people standing, positions unchanged. Matthew remained seated for a moment after the others left. The room was quiet again, contained, but no longer controlled. He looked at the folder, at the name, Lorraine Wallace. Not peripheral, not secondary, foundational. Across the city, Kendra stood at the window of her office, the late afternoon light shifting across the glass. Her phone vibrated once. A message from Charles. Review initiated, terms acknowledged. Kendra read it, then locked the screen. She did not respond. She did not forward it. She did not need to, because the structure had moved past initiation. It was now in alignment. And alignment, once established, does not require reinforcement. Behind her, the office continued. Phones ringing, voices low, work moving forward, nothing disrupted, nothing announced. But beneath it, as always, something precise had taken hold. And Matthew Reed was no longer defining it. He was moving within it, on terms he had not set. The days following the review did not escalate. They settled, not into resolution, into consequence. Matthew Reed returned to the office each morning with the same discipline he had always maintained. He arrived on time. He reviewed updates. He responded to inquiries with controlled language and measured tone. From the outside, nothing appeared fractured. But the structure beneath his work had shifted. Access remained restricted across the affected accounts. Certain transactions required dual authorization, where previously his signature had been sufficient. Internal conversations changed in cadence. Colleagues who once deferred now asked for confirmation. Not openly, not confrontationally, but consistently. Verification had replaced assumption. And assumption had been the foundation he had relied on. He adapted. He always did. But adaptation this time did not restore control. It revealed its absence. At the apartment, Kendra Wallace did not adjust her routine. She returned to work. She answered messages. She maintained the same quiet rhythm that had defined her long before the wedding. There was no visible reaction, no outward shift. But within that consistency, something had resolved. Not emotionally, structurally. She no longer moved within a space defined by Matthew's terms. She observed it from outside. The first conversation after the review was brief. Matthew entered late. Kendra was at the table reading. He did not remove his jacket immediately. He stood for a moment as if assessing whether the room had changed. It had not. "You spoke to Whitman?" he asked. Kendra turned a page before answering. "He updated me." Matthew nodded once, and Kendra looked up. "The review stands." Matthew's jaw tightened slightly. "I expected that," he said. Silence followed. Not strained, not waiting, just present. Matthew removed his jacket and set it down. "I'm restructuring some positions," he said. "Separating exposure. It'll take time." Kendra nodded. "That makes sense." Matthew studied her. "You're not asking what it means." Kendra met his gaze. "It means adjustment," she said, "not restoration." Matthew held that for a moment, then looked away. He moved into the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and stood there without drinking it. "Do you think this ends with the accounts?" he asked. Kendra closed her book. "No," she said. Matthew turned. Then where Kendra considered the question, then answered. "Where it needs to," she said. The answer did not offer direction. It defined scope. Matthew absorbed it. He did not press further, because the pattern had become clear, not fully, but enough. That night, he slept less. Not from anxiety, from calculation. He reviewed documents again, older ones, the ones he had once considered irrelevant to current operations. Now they defined them. Each clause he had overlooked, each condition he had assumed would never activate, each signature that tied the present to a past he had not controlled. He began to see it, not as a mistake, as a gap in understanding that had allowed him to build something on terms he had never fully examined. And now those terms had returned, not aggressively, precisely. Across the city, Kendra sat with Lorraine in the same quiet room that had held every step of this process. No documents were open, no calls in progress. The movement had already occurred. They did not need to manage it. They only needed to let it complete. "He's adjusting," Kendra said. Lorraine nodded. "He will," she replied. Kendra looked at her. "He still thinks he can stabilize it." Lorraine's expression remained calm. "He can stabilize parts of it," she said, "not the foundation." Kendra leaned back slightly. "That's where it is now," she said. "The foundation." Lorraine folded her hands. "Yes." Silence settled. Not heavy, not final, just clear. Kendra spoke again. "I'm leaving," she said. Lorraine did not react immediately. Not because she was surprised, because she was confirming. When she asked. Kendra's gaze remained steady. "Soon," she said, "before it becomes negotiation." Lorraine inclined her head slightly. "That's the right timing." Kendra nodded. "I don't want to argue it," she said, "or explain it." "You don't need to," Lorraine replied. Kendra exhaled slowly. Not relief, completion. That night, she returned to the apartment with the same measured pace she had carried through everything. Matthew was there. At the table, documents spread out in front of him. He looked up as she entered. "You're back," he said. Kendra placed her bag down. "Yes." Matthew watched her. There was something different now. Not in her expression, in her position. "You've decided something," he said. Kendra met his gaze. "Yes." Matthew leaned back slightly. "What is it?" Kendra did not sit. "I'm leaving," she said. The words did not carry weight. They carried clarity. Matthew did not respond immediately. He looked at her as if recalculating again. "Not the situation. Her. You're serious." Yes, a pause. "Then, because of this." "Then, because." Kendra shook her head once. "No," she said, "because of what it showed." Matthew's expression tightened. "That can be addressed." Kendra held his gaze. "It already was," she said. Silence. Matthew stood, not abruptly, but with intention. "We can work through this," he said. "Restructure everything. Reset." Kendra did not move. "This isn't structural," she said. Matthew stepped closer. "Then what is it?" Kendra's voice remained steady. "It's alignment," she said. "And we don't have it," Matthew exhaled. "That's not something you walk away from without trying." Kendra met the edge of his words without resistance. "I already did," she said. The room held that. No escalation, no raised voices, just position. Matthew looked at her for a long moment, then nodded once. Not agreement, recognition. "All right," he said. He stepped back, not as surrender, as acknowledgement of limit. Kendra picked up her bag. Not everything, just what she needed. "I'll arrange the rest," she said. Matthew did not stop her. He did not follow. He stood where he was as she moved toward the door. When she reached it, she paused. Not to reconsider, to complete. Then she opened it and stepped out. The door closed behind her. Inside, Matthew remained. In the same room, with the same documents, but not the same structure, because what had defined that space was no longer present, and what remained was exactly what had always been there, just visible now. The separation did not unfold in a single moment. It resolved, quietly, precisely, without resistance. Kendra Wallace did not return to the apartment, not to collect what remained, not to revisit what had already been completed. She arranged everything through process, emails, coordination, clear division. No urgency, no delay. Each step handled with the same discipline she had applied to everything before. Matthew Reed did not interfere. He responded when necessary, signed where required, reviewed terms with the same attention he had once reserved for expansion. Now it was containment, not of damage, of scope. The legal process moved efficiently. There were no disputes over assets that had already been redefined by the review. No prolonged negotiation. No attempt to reclaim what had shifted, because the foundation had already been clarified. And once clarified, there was nothing left to argue. Kendra did not seek advantage. She did not press for more. She accepted only what aligned with what had always been hers. Nothing beyond that, nothing less. Lorraine Wallace remained consistent, present when needed, absent when not. She did not attend meetings unless her presence was required. She did not speak unless the structure called for it. And when she did, it was final. The last formal meeting took place in a smaller office, not the firm, not the apartment, neutral space. Kendra arrived first. She sat at the table, a single folder in front of her. Not the old one, a new one, clean, complete. Matthew entered a few minutes later. He did not carry anything. He did not need to. Everything had already been exchanged. They acknowledged each other with a brief nod. No tension, no familiarity, just recognition. Their attorneys sat on either side. Documents were reviewed, signatures placed, not rushed, not delayed. Each page turned with intention, each line understood before it was completed. At one point, Matthew paused. Not because of uncertainty, because of recognition. He looked up at Kendra. "For what it's worth," he said, "I didn't expect this." Kendra met his gaze. "I know," she replied. Matthew held that, then nodded once. "I see it now," he said. Kendra did not ask what he meant. He did not elaborate. The process resumed. When it was done, the documents were collected. The attorneys spoke briefly. Logistics, final steps, administrative closure. Then they stood. Kendra gathered her folder. Matthew stepped back, not to avoid her, to create space. They moved toward the door at the same time, then stopped, not out of hesitation, out of awareness. Matthew spoke first. "You're leaving the city?" Kendra considered the question, then said, "Not entirely." Matthew nodded. "That makes sense." A pause. "Then you were always going to see it." Kendra looked at him. "See what she asked?" Matthew's expression remained steady. "The structure," he said. "The gaps." Kendra held his gaze. "It was always there," she said. Matthew exhaled lightly. "Yes." Another pause. Then he stepped aside. Kendra walked past him. Not quickly, not slowly, just forward. The door opened, then closed. And that was it. No final statement, no reversal, no return. Outside, the air carried the same quiet movement it always had. People passing, cars moving. Nothing marked as ending, because what had ended had done so without noise. In the weeks that followed, the adjustments continued. Matthew restructured his operations, not to reclaim what had been lost, but to stabilize what remained. He reviewed agreements more carefully, asked different questions, not because he had changed entirely, but because the cost of not asking had become clear. His reputation did not collapse. It adjusted. Some relationships distanced, others remained. The system absorbed the shift, as it always does. But it did not forget. Kendra returned to her work fully. No interruption, no visible break. She continued as she had before, observing, understanding, deciding. But now the context had changed. She no longer stood within a structure defined by someone else's assumptions. She stood within one she understood. Lorraine remained where she had always been, not elevated, not reduced, aligned, her presence unchanged by what had occurred, because it had never been dependent on it. One evening, Kendra sat with her again. The same table, the same quiet. No documents between them, no process in motion, only completion. "It's finished," Kendra said. Lorraine nodded. "Yes." Kendra looked at her. "You knew it would end this way." Lorraine considered that, then said, "I knew it would end where it needed to." Kendra absorbed that. Silence followed. Not empty, not waiting, just still. Kendra spoke again. "I didn't feel anything when I left." Lorraine's gaze remained steady. "You don't need to," she said. Kendra nodded. "I thought I would." Lorraine shook her head slightly. "Sometimes clarity doesn't come with feelings," she said. "It comes with understanding." Kendra leaned back. The room felt the same. Because it was. Nothing had been added, nothing removed, only seen. And once something is seen clearly, it no longer requires explanation. Kendra stood. "I'm going to take a few days," she said. Lorraine nodded. "Go." Kendra picked up her coat. Not in a hurry, not delayed, just moving. At the door, she paused, not to reconsider, to acknowledge. Then she stepped outside. The evening was quiet, the air steady, the city unchanged. But for Kendra Wallace, everything was exactly where it needed to be. Not because it had been fixed, because it had been revealed. And in that revelation, there was nothing left to hold on to, and nothing left to prove. The story does not end where the conflict peaks. It ends where the truth settles. Not loudly, not in triumph, but in alignment. What happened in that ballroom was never just about a seat at a table. It was about how people define value when they believe no one is watching closely. It was about the difference between appearance and foundation. And it was about what remains when those two are no longer allowed to overlap. Kendra did not win in the way stories often define winning. She did not return humiliation with humiliation. She did not stand in the center of the room and reclaim space through volume. She stepped out of a structure that no longer aligned with what she understood to be true. And she did it without needing permission. Matthew did not collapse. His world did not disappear, but it shifted subtly permanently into something that required him to see what he had once overlooked. Not because he was forced to. And the woman never changed position. She never needed to. His real strength does not rise in response to conflict. It remains steady long enough for everything else to reveal itself around you. If you stay with this story to the end, you've already seen what most people miss. Sometimes the loudest game is not the one. It's the quiet follow. If this story resonates with you, take a moment to share what kind is a part of the world. I read every novel. I'm always interested in where these stories lead. And if you believe stories like this about clarity, dignity, and strength, you're welcome to stay.